We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 30a. On the previous Amud, Rabbi Yochanan said things you can do. Let's say you have a lot of money and you want to lose it quickly. And the third was to hire workers and not supervise them. And the Gemara now explains, Beture denafish pisidaya. We're talking about those who are taking care of the oxen. There can be a great loss of money over there. Rashi explains, denafish pisidaya sharova avodas karkos shalen b'shvarim haisa. Most of the work that they did on the land was with oxen. Af charishas hakramim uvitzirasa manhigim klei machrisha ba'agola ben shuras hakerem im habosrim. Even when it came to the plowing of the vineyards and the harvesting, they would take these plows with a wagon and they would go through the rows of the vineyards together with those who were gathering venos and shamha avonim, and they would put the grapes there. Lefikach, therefore, the point is, if the owners are not supervising, yesh hefsed gadol, is going to be a great loss. Shein derech hapolim lochos al hakerem, because the workers don't care much about the vineyard. Ve'al hashvarim, or the oxen, umanhikim osan al gafanim ve'al netios ve'miskalkalin ve'ashvarim nischavin ve'nishbarim, and so they're going to walk them right over the vines and right over everything that's planted, and they're going to be ruined, and also the oxen themselves are going to get injured in the way they're being led, and so therefore that's why the owner has to be there supervising. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Shotcha litzarcha, he can spread out this garment, let's say, for its sake, to ventilate it, avalo lichvoda, but not for his own honor. Again, that's talking about an item that he found. And the Gemara says, Yiboilu, they had the following question, litzarcho ulitzarcha, let's say we're talking about doing it for his sake, but also for the sake of the garment. What would be the halach in that case? And the Gemara says, Tashma, coming here, proof from the Mishnah, it says, Shotcha litzarcha, it says you can do it for its sake, you can spread it out for its sake. That sounds like litzarcha in, for its sake, yes, that's allowed. Halitzarcho ulitzarcha lo, but if it was for both his own sake and for its sake, no, then it would be a problem. But the Gemara then says, Masechet, but let's look at the end of the Mishnah. It says, Avalo lichvodo, he can't spread it out for his honor. That sounds like lichvodo hudalo, he's not allowed to do it for his honor. Halitzarcha ulitzarcha, but if it's for its sake and for his needs, so then shaper dummy, so then it's fine. And so the Gemara says, rather, you can't really prove anything from the Mishnah because it has inferences in both directions. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Brisa. Lo yishtechena lo agabi mita v'lo agabi mogad. It says you can't spread it on the bed or on a hanger. Litzarcho, for his sake. Aval yishtechena agabi mita v'agabi mogad litzarcha. But you could do it. You could spread it on the bed or the hanger for its own sake. Nizdamnu lo orchem. Now, if guests come, lo yishtechena lo agabi mita v'lo agabi mogad, then he should not spread it on the bed or on the hanger. Bein litzarcha, whether it's for his sake or whether it's for the sake of the garment. And so therefore you see, it doesn't make any difference. Even if it's litzarcho and litzarcha, it is going to be problematic, even if it's for both. And the Gemara says to that, Shani Hasam, it's different over there when there are guests, the mikla kalila, because it's equivalent to burning it, imisham eina, either because of the evil eye, when the guests see this thing that's spread, imisham ganvi, or now they know about it, and it might get stolen. So in a situation where there's guests, we're actually more strict in terms of spreading it. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following brisa that this is relevant to egla arufa. The halach is that in order for a calf to be used as an egla arufa, no work can be done with the calf. And the brisa says, let's say he puts it into the yoke and it ends up threshing, but that's not his intention. So then it's still kosher. That's not considered that you did work with the calf, and it would still be kosher to use as an egla arufa. But let's say you did it in order that it should nurse. Let's say the mother was also there right next to the calf, so it was nursing from the mother, but also you had kavana, you had intention that it should thresh as well. So then psula, then it's going to be disqualified for egla arufa because of your intention. And so the Gemara says, but over here, it's exactly our case. He's doing it litzarcho ulitzarcha. He's doing it in order shetinok vitidosh, that it should nurse, but also that it should do the work. The katani psulin, we're saying it's disqualified. We're saying that's considered that it has worked. And the same thing should be true when it comes to spreading out the garment that you find. That should be a problem if it's litzarcho ulitzarcha. And the Gemara says, Shani Hasam, it's different over there by Egla Arufa. Diyamar Kra, because the pasuk says, Asher lo ubad ba, and that implies mikol makom, any kind of work is done, even if it's work that just happens memela. That's why we're more strict in this situation by bishvil shetinok v'tidosh, specifically by Egla Arufa. It's a pasuk that it is disqualified. But the Gemara says, if so, afilu reishanami, then why don't we say it's disqualified also in the beginning of the brisa, where he had no intention that it should thresh, where we said kshera, we should say that's a problem also, because it happened memela, but at the end of the day, it did work. And the Gemara says to that, Halo damya elalaha. The Gemara answers to that, no, because it's similar to what we find by para aduma. It's a very similar halacha by para aduma. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, shachin ala of kashera. Let's say the cow, a bird rests on the cow. That's not considered to be work. It's still kosher to be a para aduma. Allah zachar, but let's say it's mounted by a male, which is a disqualification by paraduma, so then psula, so then it's disqualified. And why do we make this distinction? My time, and what's the reason? Kid Rapapa, it's like Rapapa says, the Amar Rapapa says, Iksiv uvad v'karinan uvad, if it was written the word ubad, and we read it that way, we read it as ubad, again, that sounds like even if work happens with no intention whatsoever, so havamina afilu memela, then I would say, even if it happens memela, it's problematic. V'ksiv avad v'karinan avad, if it's written avad and read avad, havamina ad avad ba'iyu, then I would say that you have to actually do the work actively. It can't be something that just happens memela. But hashtag avad v'karinan uvad, now that it's written avad, but it's read as ubad, so ba'inan ubad dumya de avad, it needs to be that it can happen memela, but it has to have some similarity to you actually doing the work intentionally, and we understand that to mean ma'avad de, just like if you work the animal intentionally, obviously it's nichale, it's something that you want. Af uvad de nichale. So too, if it's something that happens memela, happens automatically, so to speak, but then also it has to at least be pleasing for the person. If it's something that the person wants, then it's going to be problematic, and so that's the same thing over here. In this situation, if he just enters it into the yoke, but he has no intention whatsoever that it should thresh, and it threshes, then it's still ksheira, because it's not nichale. However, if he's doing it in order, shetinak v'tidosh, so now he's having in mind the threshing, even though he's having something else in mind as well, but still that's going to be a problem, it's going to be psula. And Rashi explains, again, this is talking about Egla Arufa. What happens is they attach 3 or 4 animals together by their necks, that's the yoke, and then they thresh in that fashion. The reason why it's kosher is because that wasn't the person's intention. But if the intention is that it should nurse but also should thresh, the point over here is that the mother of the animal was also threshing. And so the daughter was brought into that area, into the yoke, in order that it should nurse. But he also is having in mind that it should thresh. So psula, then it's going to be puzzle. And then the Gemara said, "Holo damya teirutzi." Again, that was an answer. We're answering from Paraduma, the Mishnah by Paraduma. Shachin ala of beParaduma koi. If a bird rests on it, so then it's okay. Allah ala zachar, but if it's mounted by a male, psula, then it's puzzle. Shenemar shelo Allah aleha ol v'tanya ol ainli ala ol. It says that it doesn't have a yoke. So the Brisa says, I might think only a yoke, but then we learn out also that if a zachar mounts it, that's also a problem. But Mesechet Sota, that's learned out of Mesechet Sota. The point over here is that when he enters it into the yoke and it threshes, the lo nichale, but that he didn't really want the work, so damya l'shachin ala of. That's already more comparable to the case where the bird rests upon it. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, "Klei chesev u'chlei nechoshes meshtamish ben v'chulu." If he finds silver vessels or copper vessels, he uses them for their own sake. And the Gemara says, Tana Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Hamotzi kliates, if somebody finds wooden vessels, mishtamish ben, he should use them, b'shvil shelo yirkavu, so that they don't deteriorate. Klei nechoshes, if he finds copper vessels, mishtamish ben bechamin, he should use them with hot water, avalol yedei ha'or, but not directly with fire, memneshem ashchikon, because that will cause it to erode. Klei chesef, if he finds silver vessels, mishtamish ben bitzonin, avalol bechamin, he should use them with cold water, but not with hot water, memneshem ashchiron, that causes them to blacken. Magrifos v'kardumos, if he finds rakes or axes, mishtamish ben barach, he should use them with soft items, avalo bekasha, but not with hard items, because that causes damage to them. Klei zav u'klei zechuchis, if he finds golden vessels or glass vessels, lo yiga bahen ad sheyavo Eliyahu, he shouldn't touch them until Eliyahu Navi comes. Kederach shamru ba'aveda, the same thing that they say by lost objects, kach chamra b'pikadon, the same thing is true by deposits, he should use them in the same fashion. The Gemara says pikadon by deposits, ma'aveda tagabe, what's he using them at all? Let the owner come and use it. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Ravada Bar Chama, Amar Rav Sheshes, Ravada Bar Chama says, the Rav Sheshes says, Bepikadon shalchu ba'alei in the Medina Sayam. We're talking about deposits where the owners have already went, they've traveled far away, so in that situation they can't be the ones to use it, so the person who's watching over it, he should use it, again, for the sake of the vessel itself. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Matzah sako kupa, if a person finds a sack or a basket, v'chol davar shein darko lital, anything that the person himself would normally not carry around, it would be beneath his dignity, hareza lo yital, so he shouldn't take that item. And the Gemara says, Menan, immediately from where do we know this? To Tan Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught, V'salamta, it says you should hide. What that pasuk means to say is, Pa'amim shatam esalim. Sometimes you are allowed to ignore the lost object. To Pa'amim shiyatam esalim. And sometimes you're not allowed to ignore it. You have to deal with it and return it to the proper owner. And the Gemara explains, Haketzat how so. The Bryce explains, Haketzat how so. Hayakohen v'hi beveis hakvaris. Let's say, for example, the person's a Kohen, and the lost object is in the cemetery, so he can't go into the cemetery. Or let's say he's an older person, and it would be beneath his dignity to deal with this item. Or let's say the work that he's losing out on by returning this lost item is actually worth more than the lost item itself. In that case also, he shouldn't return it because he's going to end up having to be reimbursed for the lost work. It's going to be much more than what he just returned to the person. That's why it says for these cases, V'salamta mehem. It says V'salamta mehem to say these are examples of cases where you are allowed to turn away from the lost item. You don't have to return it. And the Gemara now clarifies, L'mai itzrich kra. So what exactly of the three cases, which of the three cases is the pasuk needed for? Ilema l'kohen v'hi beveis hakvar. So if you say it's needed for the case of the kohen in the cemetery, pshita, that's obvious. You don't need a pasuk to say that he doesn't go into the cemetery. It's obvious he doesn't go to the cemetery. Hayaseh, because returning a lost object is a mitzvah saseh. It's a positive commandment. V'hay lo saseh v'yaseh. But to not become tameh, that's two commandments. It's a negative commandment and a positive commandment. It's obvious. V'lo asi aseh v'dachias lo saseh v'yaseh. A positive commandment can't push off a negative and positive commandment. V'su and further, lo dachin isur mekami mamona. We wouldn't push off an isur, a prohibition of the kohen becoming tameh, for something that's a momentous issue, a monetary issue. So clearly the pasuk is not for that example. Rather, you'll say it's for the case where, let's say, his loss is going to be greater than the value of the lost object. But that also you don't need a pasuk. Rav Yehuda Marav nafka. That's learned out from the statement of Rav Yehuda from Rav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, because Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the pasuk says efes ki. This is a pasuk talking about making sure there are no poor people. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Amud Beis.